Hello, the purpose of this screencast is to continue talking about the economic factors of slavery, and this is the second part of talking about those economic factors. Again, you will take notes on most of what you see on the following slides. Some of it you will not. I will tell you when you should take notes and when you should not. And you can also pause throughout the presentation to do so, but please listen to the entire presentation because I put things in context and help you make sense of the ideas. The economic factors of slavery, Part 2B, involves the slave auction, cash crops, cotton gin, and cotton culture. So again, this is all about how money was made off of slavery and off the backs of enslaved labor. Together we will watch this video from history.com. It is about the slave auction. So, because we're continuing, we are on Roman numeral 4. It's called the slave auction. Here we see an advertisement from the time, so this is a primary source, on an actual slave auction that took place in 1855 in March, and it's where enslaved people were bought and sold to the highest bidders. Uppercase A, so you were taking notes on this because it's got the A next to it. Auctioneer sold enslaved people to the highest bidders. And an auctioneer is the person who is trying to get bids to compete back and forth to raise the price on a particular product, and in this case it was people. Lowercase a, this is the process. Enslaved people were removed from the ship after crossing the Middle Passage. They were generally held in prisons or pens, awaiting for the auction. This you do not need to take notes on, that's why it's in orange. But usually grease or tar was applied to the skin to make the enslaved person look healthy. This is very similar to what might happen when you show off your home when you want to sell it. Is you pay somebody money to come in and showcase the home, set your house up so that it looks really good to potential buyers. Same thing was done here. By greasing and tarring the skin, it made a person look more healthy. Do need to take notes here. This is lowercase c. Families were split apart. So at the auction, that is where further splintering of families took place. It could have taken place back in Africa as enslaved people were loading the boats as well. They were separated at least in terms of below deck, above deck, or some were left on land and placed on different ships. Further splintering may have occurred here at the auction where enslaved people were sold to different buyers. And uppercase B, more enslaved property equals higher status. So if you were a person that was a planter that owned enslaved labor, the more enslaved labor you had, the higher your social status was. You were looked at as a more important or wealthy person. So it was a way to showcase your wealth, was by showing off how many enslaved people you had. This was more common in the South. You do not need to take a note on this, but this is called the Weeping Time, and this is the largest auction in American history, and in class we will take a look at this link to talk about the Weeping Time. Okay, Roman numeral 5 is cash crops. Please take that note. And you're kind of catching on that everything that's written in white is the notes you're taking. Here are enslaved labor picking what looks like sugar cane. So this is probably in the Caribbean or in parts of Louisiana or Alabama. So cash crops, a source of income for plantations. And we find that a plantation is basically a very large farm that is oversaw by a family or a single family or a couple families that own the plantation, or it's been passed from generation to generation, and the owner of it would be called a planter or the master. And it was the way that that planter made money, and so the plantation was the place that all the crops were grown upon, so these cash crops. And you found them in the American South or in the Caribbean and in parts of South America. Lowercase b, these cash crops, after being grown in the American South and the Caribbean and South America, were exported to Europe, meaning they were sent back to Europe. Lowercase c, cash crops include cotton, rubber, which is from a tree, sugarcane, tobacco, rice, and indigo. Together, these are called raw goods or raw materials. And D, you just need to write what is in white. It required a lot of labor to be profitable. You needed a lot of people doing what these people are doing here, picking it to make it profitable so you could have sizable enough crop yields to sell off enough product to make money. So this made the demand for enslaved labor very high. You wanted to have as many people picking your product as possible to get that shipped back to Europe. The cotton gin, this is Roman numeral 6, and we'll take a look at this link, but here is the cotton gin in action here. It looks like this. You turn this wheel and then you feed the raw cotton into these turning wheels here, and it's almost like claws where it pulls the fiber of the cotton, the fluffy part, away from the seed. And then you can see these bales of this might be going into the gin itself, but then they're collecting bales of the cotton, just the fluff here. This was very labor intensive if you had to do it by hand, but the gin did things a lot faster. So there was a problem. It took a lot of labor to remove the cotton from its seeds. And this is called cleaning cotton, or cleaned cotton is where you had the seeds removed. You are taking this note because of the Roman numeral A. Take this note as well, lowercase a. Cotton crops had to be small because it took so long to take these big bales of cotton and remove the fluff from the seeds. You just simply couldn't grow that much when you were doing that by hand. What was the solution? Well, Eli Whitney comes along and creates the cotton gin in around 1793. He called it cotton gin. Gin is short for engine. And it could produce up to 50 pounds of cleaned cotton in a day, which was a ton compared to when you had to do it by hand. So cotton gin is a device for removing the seeds from the cotton fiber, and Whitney thought it would actually decrease the demand for enslaved labor. So you'd make this machine, you didn't need as many enslaved people working on it. But you're going to see that a problem arose. So continuing the cotton gin, we'll look at this link in class. Here is a close-up of the cotton fiber, and you can see the seeds attached to it. So generally you'd have to pick those seeds apart from the fluff by hand, but the gin did that automatically in massive amounts. So please write this down, uppercase C, cause gin made cleaning cotton or removing the seeds easy. So what's the effect? Well, maybe not exactly what Whitney wanted. It increased the demand for land to grow cotton. So because you could actually now remove the seed from the fluff faster, now planters wanted more land to grow more cotton. You can maybe see where the problem lies here. So increased demand for enslaved labor to actually go out and pick the cotton from the fields. They didn't have a machine yet, like a combine, to actually gather the cotton off the fields. That was the job of enslaved labor. So it actually had the opposite effect of what Whitney wanted. Whitney thought it would decrease the demand for enslaved labor, when in fact it increased it. And it increased it by making cotton very profitable in the South, whereas previously it wasn't a very popular crop because it was so difficult to grow, or mainly to separate the cotton seed from the fluff. It was just too labor intensive to grow. But now with the gin, it was much easier to grow. You have a huge demand for land, and now a giant demand for enslaved labor. So you needed more workers in the fields, lowercase Roman numeral I, or 1, sorry, and lowercase Roman numeral 2. Impossible for enslaved labor to buy or be granted freedom. So any enslaved labor that wanted to buy their freedom or become free now were being turned down by the planters or by their masters because they simply were too valuable. The masters or planters needed their enslaved labor in the field, needed, in air quotes, their enslaved labor in the field to pick the cotton. Okay, so cotton culture arises in the American South. And this is a textile mill in a northeastern city. It could be a textile mill back in England, but they're now taking the cotton and making it into sheets of cloth, which then can be made into drapes, tablecloths, clothing like this woman is wearing and this gentleman is wearing, anything that's made out of cloth. And you can see it's done on a massive scale here, taking a lot of raw cotton and turning it into cloth, which is woven together. So, uppercase A, high demand in America and Europe for goods made out of American cotton. So all throughout, at least the Western world, America and Europe, people want cotton. They want clothing made out of it, mainly because cotton is easy to deal with. It's not irritating to wear like wool. It's not as hot. It's breathable. So people wanted clothing made out of cotton or items made out of cotton. So 10 years after the cotton gin was put to use, so we're right around 1800, 1805, the U.S. crop leaped from a $150,000 industry to more than an $8 million industry. So cotton skyrocketed. It became a huge industry around the world, mainly in Europe and America. And lowercase b, textile mills in the north, Boston, New York, etc., created goods made out of cotton, sheets, clothing, etc. So the North wasn't off the hook. They were participating in what enslaved labor was doing as well. So people were making money off the backs of enslaved labor in the North as well. People were getting jobs like this woman and this man because of the enslaved labor that was picking the cotton for this mill. So if the North feels like it's not really participating in slavery, they really are, because jobs are opening up because cotton is being shipped up north to be created into something in these mills. So the whole U.S. economy is dependent on cotton, and the whole U.S. economy is profiting from cotton, which means they're profiting from the free labor of enslaved people. So cotton culture continued, Roman numeral 7, and now we're at letter B. We have something called the Second Middle Passage. And first I'll show you the words and I'll describe this picture. So lowercase a, the migration of enslaved labor from the coastal South here to the deep South here, or way down here, but here, which is Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas. So enslaved labor is moving. And this migration was fueled by a demand for slave-produced cotton. So here in 1790, and you can see each dot represents 200 enslaved people. You can see the dots. So most enslaved labor is right around Virginia, and they're picking tobacco or rice. This might be a rice crop in South Carolina. So rice, indigo, and tobacco. But in 1860, and remember the cotton gin is just after 1790, but by 1860, you can see that the amount of enslaved labor has increased dramatically. And that's not because more enslaved people are coming from Africa. That actually was stopped in 1807. But it's just simply the families of enslaved people are having children, and the number of enslaved labor is increasing. And a lot of that enslaved labor is now moving out of this coastal South, which is where my cursor is, into the deep South, which is where this belt runs all the way here through Louisiana. And this is where cotton is being grown. And there is a belief that had Eli Whitney not invented the cotton gin, that maybe slavery would have died out because it simply was too expensive to own enslaved labor for the amount of money that was being made off of tobacco or rice or indigo, because the popularity of those crops was actually dying off. But with the cotton gin and the explosion of interest in cotton, it kept slavery alive up until 1860, because by 1861 we're starting the Civil War, which of course was over slavery and ending it. So here's the sources that I used. Thank you for listening.